So this video is based on specialisation and division of labour as part of microeconomics. So to begin with, what do we mean by specialisation? So specialisation is the process of concentrating on becoming an expert in one particular field or I suppose a specific job role. Alright, and the whole idea of it is if you concentrate on that specific role, if you concentrate on that particular field, then you'll become highly skilled and you'll become an expert within that field and within that role. So it should reduce the average unit cost due to the enhanced productivity. Now we are going to delve into how to achieve specialisation. We're going to look at in more depth the benefits of specialisation. We're also going to look at some limitations of specialisation, some possible drawbacks as to why it might not always increase productivity. Now, one of the methods of achieving specialisation is this concept of division of labour. Now, before I delve into what division of labour is, I always use in my classes the example of Formula 1. And it's a very, very good video based on Formula 1 pit stop and how, as part of a Formula 1 team, they've all got very, very specific roles, focusing on very specific tasks, but they're all working together in complete harmony. So even though they've got specific roles which differ to one another, the combination of all the roles actually help to achieve the finished product. In this case, not necessarily a product, but the speed of getting them through that pit stop. So I'm just going to show the video now.
Pit stops are part of motor racing history. Against the relentless stopwatch, time is critical, pressure is high. Mistakes are easily made. Force India have a team of 26 men awaiting their Formula 1 car. The Lollipop Man. 3 on the jacks. 2 team members for starter motor and pneumatic refill. Plus firemen and emergency crew for the fuel rig dead man's handle. 4 on the wheel guns. 4 men take the wheels off. 4 more put fresh tyres back on. 2 refuelers plus 2 more for the backup fuel rig. Pit stop crews are well aware they could win or lose races.
When the car's coming towards me, Hoadley's going to stop on the mark.
It's quite simple, but it can go wrong. You have just a few seconds to react, keep out of the way of the front wing, and then get on with your job. You've got to concentrate solely on your corner. You're fully focused on your one job, second nature. You practice it so much, it has to be second nature.
The Lollipop Man, silly name, serious job. He guides the driver to his garage, advises when to select first gear, and then he must release the car at exactly the right point, unlike this Ferrari Schumacher pit stop. The fuel men need to be like rugby players. The fuel-laden hoses are very heavy. They must attach the nozzle accurately, then push through the valve. It's high-quality road car petrol, including 5% biofuel, flowing at 12 litres per second. That's a lot of fuel, and if it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. Hot racing cars and fresh fuel shouldn't mix. A fireman stands by. The front jackman sometimes risks his legs to stop the car, and using a manual jack against the front wing, he lifts in unison with the rear jackman. They have blind faith that the driver will stop, occasionally misplaced. A third side jack is used to stabilise the car, or if they need to change the front wing when it's damaged. To change the nose and wing section, the crew move around. 2 men leave front wheel duties and become the wingmen, taking just 12 seconds and using 2 captive bolts. The gunmen are waiting on one knee with compressed air gun and brake cooling spinner ready. They need the driver to stop on his mark, so the wheel nut is directly in front of them, and the frantic work begins. Sometimes the wheel nut won't go on, and sometimes the wheels won't stay on. 4 men are ready to take the very hot wheels off. 4 more men put the fresh wheels and tyres on. It gets terribly disappointing when only 3 turn up. A great pit stop is a perfect display of human and mechanical harmony, where every second is precious and the driver's safety is at stake. Banjo had the luxury of being out of his car for over a minute while 2 mechanics serviced it. Now, 26 men get the job done in less than 10 seconds.
So as you can see from the video, it's a really, really good visual example of division of labour and specialisation. And the reason for that is because division of labour cares when production is broken down into lots of separate tasks. And therefore, when we talk about specialisation, it allows every individual within that specific task to specialise. Now, when we look at the Formula 1 example, you might think, well, what's the output? I suppose the output is the speed of getting through that pit stop. And if you thought about every single person within that team and the role that they had to play, even some of the roles where you think, oh, is it that important, like the lollipop man, the video really demonstrated how integral every single role was to getting that pit stop done as fast as possible and to increase the productivity of that Formula 1 team. Now, if we think about I suppose other companies that produce actual goods, let's imagine a car manufacturer, you might have a team producing those cars with very, very specific roles, which all differ from one another, but because they're working on that specific role every single day, they become specialised with it, they become very, very productive. And if you then think about the whole picture, the bigger picture of every single specific person and the job that they do, which then contributes to the overall output and the finished good, clearly productivity is going to be massively enhanced and output is going to increase because of that increased productivity. Now, when we're looking at I suppose some economists and some theorists who really explored division of labour and specialisation, we can look at Adam Smith. Now, in The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith really explored division of labour with regards to a pin factory. And I'm just going to pretty much just show you a couple of extracts from The Wealth of Nations, which I suppose develops this idea of division of labour. So to begin with, this whole idea of a pin, one man draws out the wire, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, a fifth grinds it at the top for receiving the head. To make the head require 2 or 3 distinct operations. Now, and the important business of making a pin is in the manner divided into about 18 distinct operations. So again, if we think about breaking the task down into lots of different roles, in this case 18 for just making a pin, which in some manufacturers are all performed by distinct hands. They could, when they exerted themselves, make among them about 12 pounds of pins in a day. There are in a pound upwards of 4,000 pins of middling size. So those 10 persons, therefore, could make among them upwards of 48,000 pins a day. And that's where Adam Smith really delves into how important division of labour could be in terms of increasing productivity and therefore increasing output. So when we're looking at Adam Smith, he essentially said that by dividing the production of pins into 18 different tasks, the output of pins would increase significantly. Each worker specialises and therefore the overall output increases. And you can kind of see from the picture some of the diagrams and how they may have split it up. Now, when we look at the benefits of specialisation, we've already mentioned the word productivity quite a lot, but the increased productivity, we could delve into it in lots of different ways. To begin with, first of all, we can look at it in terms of PPF, because what specialisation can do is it can actually, I suppose, reduce the opportunity cost that is sometimes present within the production of two goods. If you thought about a certain company that had a certain amount of labour, and they only could employ that amount of labour in that given time period, and therefore they could only produce at that first PPF curve. But then maybe a new manager comes in with new ideas, with new training for their staff, and they specialise the workers, and they bring in production processes and ideas such as division of labour, and then all of a sudden those employees could produce more than they could before. And therefore, even with the same amount of inputs, their output is increasing because of these new methods that have been brought in. And that's where we see a shift in the PPF rightwards, because they're now able to produce greater output of good X and greater output of good Y, because they're able to specialise in both goods, which they didn't do before, because maybe they didn't function division of labour. Now, if they were, for example, just focusing on one product and maybe it was just focused on good X, then we'd see an increased shift from good X. However, good Y would remain the same, and therefore you can draw the PPF to fit around the given circumstance and the given situation that you want to look at. Another benefit is obviously when you're looking at supply, because the whole idea of increasing productivity is therefore the ability and the willingness of suppliers can actually now produce more goods. So when we're looking at a supply and demand diagram, and let's say we give the example of a pin factory, At Q1 and at P, they could produce a certain amount of pins. But then obviously division of labour comes in and specialisation comes in, and now they can produce more than they could before. And that causes that shift of supply to supply 1, and therefore from Q to Q1. And because of obviously the additional supply and the excess supply, it obviously means that the price is reduced, and then there's an extension of demand. Another benefit is when we're looking at specialisation, we're looking at long term as well, like the PPF, we can look at it from the point of view of economies of scale. Because now what will happen is when a firm obviously increases their output, which they will be able to do because of specialisation and division of labour, they'll increase their output, but not by increasing the amount of inputs, not by hiring more staff, not by buying more capital goods, but actually just by retraining and by improving the skill level of their current workforce. So they're making their current workforce so much more effective, which actually means therefore the labour costs that were involved now are much more cost effective than they were previously. So what we see is a firm is able to not only increase its output, but also reduce its average unit costs at the same time. And I suppose the whole idea of it is it reduces opportunity costs, and it allows not just an increase in productivity, but obviously an increase in production as well. Now, there are some issues with specialisation and division of labour. It's not all perfect, and there can be problems with it. First of all, it can reduce flexibility, which this image pretty much shows. But when we're looking at specialisation, because you are working at a very, very specific role, if there weren't many alternatives to you within the company, and let's say you were the only one who specialised within that role, and we've already mentioned how integral that would make you to the team, but if for whatever reason you were absent, maybe just in general terms of absenteeism, maybe you were off sick or whatever it might be, or maybe you actually decided to leave the company, then that causes greater problems with recruitment and making sure that whoever you recruit to replace you, or whoever the company recruits to replace you, can be skilled as fast as possible to specialise within that role, because by your role now lacking, that can obviously impact the overall quality of the good that's being produced. And also, when we're looking at it in terms of, we've talked about turnover of staff and people maybe leaving. Actually, another reason why someone might leave is because the repetitive and tedious nature of the job. If you're doing the exact same role every single day, and you're just doing a very, very specific task, and there's no variation within that role, you can imagine it might get boring. You might like the idea of being an expert, so that might not bore you, but if you're not too concerned about that and you want to do something else, you want a greater variety, then you could argue that might be an issue. And when we're thinking about economists and we're looking at theorists, Adam Smith did consider this, and he did mention this again with the Wealth of Nations, but also Karl Marx looked at it as well. And Karl Marx, he argued that sometimes you're not utilising labour to their full ability by making them specifically specialise on one role. What Karl Marx thought was actually you are underestimating the importance of that employee in terms of what they're capable of and what other roles they could do. Now, by producing a lot of one type of good through specialisation, variety could in fact decrease for consumers, and that's looking at a whole economy and the whole general point. So, for example, if you had a country that specialised in a certain good, and they utilised or they allocated all their resources towards that good, then you might argue, well, where are they going to get their other goods from? And in terms of if the general answer to that is we'd have to import the goods from another country. But if there was any trade problems with that country or any economic shocks, so for example the pandemic with COVID, then does that actually limit our ability to access certain goods because we're not producing them because we're so focused on other types of goods? And another factor within that which relates is the possibility of structural unemployment, because since skills might not be transferable because you've been so specific to a certain job role, if that job role or if that industry becomes redundant and is no longer there, then you've got a lot of workers who've been now made redundant, and what can they do? they'll have to retrain. And have they got the ability to retrain? And if they haven't got the ability to retrain, or they're not in their family circumstances doesn't allow it, then that means they'll probably have to accept a job which is less productive for the economy. So there are problems with specialisation on an employee point of view, a company point of view, but also whole economy point of view as well.
In AQA, we also have to consider why specialisation is a medium of exchange. Consider, we produce output to provide an income, and with that income, we have a choice of goods that we can purchase. Well, if we specialise and we lived in a world of no currency, how would we actually trade? Take a teacher, they specialise in education. Well, how would they pay for a meal at a restaurant? Would they have to barter an hour of teaching for a 3-course meal? Is that likely? Will it be desired by all? A mechanic fixing cars, well, what if a car doesn't need fixing? Or the entrepreneur doesn't own a car, then how do they trade? That would discourage specialisation. Now, money allows that medium of exchange. Of course, this can then promote specialisation, as specialisation will increase output, which can then be sold. Greater volume means greater income, and hence greater expenditure. But expenditure on a range of goods.